Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Divine Femininity United. I'm your girl, Dr. Bianca Miss B. Lee. And when I tell you today is awesome, today is awesome, today is awesome because it's so much happening in our nation today. You already know. Today is the election. Okay, so there's so much going on, and that is actually why we are here. We're here because there's so much going on, and today, this evening, rather, there will be a huge announcement as to who our next U.S. president elect will be. Okay, and so typically we're usually scheduled for 8 o'clock p.m. on Tuesdays. Well, I feel like you all will be glued to whatever streaming or television device or listening device you have near you to hear what the updates are. And what I don't want to do is to clash with that because it is very important. But so is this. So I figured we would come on early, and then whomever dives in with us in real time, they can, because we are airing on several platforms. We're airing on Clubhouse, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all of those platforms. So whomever tunes in, they tune in. If and then whoever needs to catch it on the replay, it is there for you to do so. So that's why I do appreciate the archived abilities of these platforms. I really do. But in any case, I did not want to throw us off, okay, because of the happenings in the nation, okay, that'll ultimately affect, I believe, worldwide who we place and who will be the next elected U.S. president. That is major. It's major. It's been so much going on here, you all, as you already know. You know, if you don't know, then you have been under a rock because, goodness gracious, there's been so much going on. But I do trust and believe that the will of the Most High, or whatever is orchestrated to happen, will happen divinely. It'll happen. I don't operate in fear. I don't live in fear. I don't. I don't. Yeah, I don't take up residence in fear or trauma or anxiety or division. I don't subscribe to those things, and I try my best to steer clear of all of the happenings. I don't even speak. You notice I don't even speak about any of the things, because I believe that these matters are private matters, and these matters, whatever you choose, whomever you support, it's your right to do so. You know, that is the beauty about this being the land of the free, home of the brave. So it's stated, you know what I mean? And so I really don't believe, I believe that there are some certain subject matters that should remain private, you know? There's a reason why our voting booths are cubicle like, you know? No one is privy to that information. No one is privy to know how you vote, who you support, or whatever the case. The only way that they'll know is if you broadcast it. Okay. Um, but I also understand agreeing to disagree. I do. I understand that everyone has a right to choose, and to say that they don't, to try to convince or coerce, either way, is violating that person's right to choose on their own. You know, they have a right. They have a right. We don't have to like all of the choices. No one likes all of our choices either. Hello, somebody, right? But we had a right to choose them. Being a human being, being a citizen here in this country, we all have rights. So I choose to respect the rights of everyone, and I choose to still, in lieu of, regardless of which direction someone chooses, I still to operate. I still choose to operate in love, and in peace, and in joy, and in freedom, no matter what. So that is my stance. And so, with that being said, I did not want to interfere with the followings of what's happening, you know, in the country. So I wanted to come on and just do our due diligence here. We took a huge pivot from the book that we were once reading, The Body Keeps the Score. We're going to go back to that book, you know, please believe we're going to complete that book, but because it's very important. It's talking about how trauma is stored in our bodies, how our bodies knows trauma. It's stuck in the muscle memory of our bodies. And no matter how we've learned to cope with those traumas, regardless of us moving forward and living life and going on, it doesn't mean that we have gotten rid of the trauma in our vessel. Our bodies, our spirits, our minds keeps the score. It knows all of the things. It's in the subconscious of us, you know. It goes nowhere until we address it, or do we, you know, embrace some of those things and not hide away from it, or run away or avoid or act like it never existed. No, those things are not helpful at all. And so that book speaks more about that, and I'm excited to get back to that. But I was spirit led to go into another direction here, which is something that we've never done before. Um, and I wanted to read the book The Shack. This book has been made into a movie. It is a New York number one New York Times bestseller. And rightfully so. It is an amazing book. It's an amazing movie, and yeah, there's so much in it. So much in it. So we've read that the preface, and we've read the chapter one. Okay, so we got the back, kind of like we got glimpses of the backstory. Okay, where he had Mackenzie, Mack is the character here that we're speaking of, and he had an abusive upbringing with his father in particular. He loved his mom and his siblings and things like that. His father, who also was a pastor, ironically enough, wasn't an alcoholic. I mean, like a drunken, hugely abusive alcoholic, where he suffered from that, by way of angry words and things like that. And he recanted how his father, when he did share, when he Mack did share some of the violations and the abuses that he was going through, he shared it, and he got in trouble for it. His father tied him to a tree, and he beat him for 2 days, left him there for 2 days, and he would, in between his drunken stupors, would go and beat him and stuff like that. And so he ran away, and had a whole bunch of life experiences, things like that, sailor and all of that stuff, and married his wife named Nan. They have 5 children. 3 are gone, 2 are still at home. And he talked about how this one particular day, it was icy outside, snowy and things like that, a big huge storm, and he was working from home that particular day, and went out to the mailbox, and there was a note there, and the note stated, and I'm gonna say it I'm gonna paraphrase it, how it said, hey Mackenzie, I miss you. It's been a while. I would like to see you, and if you want to see me, pretty much I'll be at the shack. Now, the shack is significant because the shack is also where a lot of his traumas had taken place. It was a dark place, the shack. And anytime he heard the shack, it brought up negative energy, negative feelings, negative memories that he wanted to and thought he had erased out of his mind and out of his heart. And the note was signed Papa. Now, he used to call his dad Papa. Okay. But as we read along in chapter one, Nan, his wife, called him from her sister's place. And she spoke about, how she had prayed that Papa would alleviate some of her sister's pain. Apparently they suffered a loss and things like that. And so that was a key component there, because when I saw that Nan referred to God as Papa, and then we also have the note signed Papa, but also, Mack called his father Papa. So there's a double connotation here. So we're gonna read on to chapters 2 and 3 to see exactly what this is and who this is and things like that. Okay, so this is really really fun. I don't think we've ever read a story like this. Now, I don't want to even disrespect the writing and say that this is nonfiction. I mean, this is a fictional book, because the preface of the book, written by William Young, the writer, the author, excuse me, this is not his story. This is Mackenzie's story. Mack is a real person. Mack is a longtime friend of William's, and William stated in the preface, like, listen, you all, a lot of this story is very over the head. You know what I'm saying? It seems very outlandish. It almost seems like unreal, unbelievable, too good to be true. But according to Mack, this these events actually happened. And so, um, yeah. So Mack said, Mack, the whose story it is, said that if you read this book and you don't believe it, then respectfully, he stated, this story is not for you. Respectfully, I get it, but William, the writer, Mack needed William to ghostwrite for him because he wasn't a great writer. So William, the writer, says, um, give Mack a chance, sit back, listen to the story, and see how his world was impacted, and hopefully yours will be too, in the great, beautiful way. Okay. Now, at any point during the reading, I want you to utilize the chat, utilize the comment section for your words, your thoughts, your feelings, what resonates with you and things like that. And I'll read your thoughts and things on my end, because your thoughts are important to me as they are important to everybody. And I do want to respect you, the fact that you are here with us. And I don't want to, ignore your very important words. Okay. Alrighty, here we go. Without further ado, this is The Shack. Chapter 2, The Gathering Dark. A quote by Paul Tournier. Nothing makes us so lonely as our secrets. Ooh, that's good. Nothing makes us so lonely as our secrets. Sometime during the night, an unexpected Chinook blew through the Willamette Valley, freeing the landscape from the icy grip, except for those things that lay hidden in the deepest shadows. Within 24 hours, it was early summer warm. Max slept late into the morning, one of those dreamless sleeps that seems to pass in an instant. When he finally crawled off the sofa, he was somewhat chagrined to see that the ice folies had fizzled out so quickly, but delighted to see Nan and the kids when they showed up less than an hour later. First came the anticipated and considerable scolding for not putting his bloodied mess in the laundry room, followed by an appropriate and satisfying amount of oohing and eyeing that accompanied her examination of his head wound. The attention pleased Mac immensely, and Nan soon had him cleaned up, patched up, and fed up. The note, though never far from his mind, was not mentioned. He still didn't know what to think of it, and he didn't want Nan included if it turned out to be some kind of cruel joke. Little distractions, like the ice storm, were a welcome, although brief, respite from the haunting presence of his constant companion, the Great Sadness, as he referred to it. Shortly after the summer that Missy vanished, the Great Sadness had draped itself around Mac's shoulders like some invisible but almost tangibly heavy quilt. The weight of its presence dulled his eyes and stooped his shoulders. Even his efforts to shake it off were exhausting, as if his arms were sewn into its bleak folds of despair and he had somehow become part of it. He ate, worked, loved, dreamed, and played in this garment of heaviness, weighed down as if he were wearing a leaden bathrobe, trudging daily through the murky despondency that sucked the color out of everything. At times, he could feel the Great Sadness slowly tightening around his chest and heart like the crushing coils of a constrictor. squeezing liquid from his eyes until he thought there no longer remained a reservoir. Other times he would dream that his feet were stuck in cloying mud as he caught brief glimpses of Missy running down the wooded path ahead of him, her red cotton summer dress gilded with wildflowers, flashing among the trees. She was completely oblivious to the dark shadow tracking her from behind. Although he frantically tried to scream warnings to her, no sound emerged, and he was always too late and impotent to save her. He would bolt upright in bed, sweat dripping from his tortured body, while waves of nausea and guilt and regret rolled over him like some surreal tidal flood. The story of Missy's disappearance is unfortunately not unlike others told too often. It all happened during Labor Day weekend, the summer's last hurrah before another year of school and autumn routines. Mack boldly decided to take the three younger children on a final camping trip to Wallowa Lake in northeastern Oregon. Nan was already booked at a continuing education class in Seattle, and the two older boys were back at college or counseling at a summer camp. But Mack was confident that he possessed the right combination of outdoorsmanship and mothering skills. After all, Nan had taught him well. The sense of adventure and camping fever gripped everyone, and the place became a whirlwind of activity. If they had done it Mack's way, they would have simply backed a moving van up to the house and shifted most of its contents for the long weekend. At one point in all of the confusion, Mack decided he needed a break and settled himself in his daddy chair after shooing off Judas, the family cat. He was about to turn on the tube when Missy came running in, holding her little plexiglass box. "Can I take my insect collection camping with us?" asked Missy. "You want to take your bugs along?" grunted Mack, not paying her much mind. "Daddy, they're not bugs, they're insects. Look, I've got lots of them in here." Mack reluctantly turned his attention to his daughter, who, seeing him focus, started explaining the contents of her treasure box. "See, there are two grasshoppers. And see on that leaf, there's my caterpillar, and somewhere, there she is. Do you see my ladybug? And I have a fly in here somewhere too, and some ants." As she inventoried her collection, Mack tried his best to show attention, nodding along. "So," Missy finished, "can I take them along?" "Sure you can, honey. Maybe we can let them loose into the wild when we're out there." "No, she can't," came a voice from the kitchen. "Missy, you need to keep your collection at home, honey. Trust me, they're safer here." Nan stuck her head around the corner and lovingly frowned at Mack as he shrugged his shoulders. "I tried, honey," he whispered to Missy. "Ugh," growled Missy. But knowing the battle was lost, she picked up her box and left. By Thursday night, the van was overloaded and pulled behind tent trailer hitched up with lights and brakes tested. Early Friday, after one last lecture from Nan to her kids about safety, obedience, brushing teeth in the mornings, not picking up cats with white stripes down their backs, and all manner of other things, they headed out. Nan north up to Interstate 205 to Washington, and Mack and the three amigos east on Interstate 84. The plan was to return the following Tuesday night, just before the first day of school. The Columbia River Gorge is worth the trip by itself, with breathtaking panoramas overseen by river-carved mesas standing sleepy guard in the late summer warmth. September and October can offer some Oregon's best weather. Indian summer often sets in around Labor Day and hangs on until Halloween, when it quickly turns cold, wet, and nasty. This year was no exception. Traffic and weather cooperated wonderfully, and the crew hardly noticed the time and miles passing by. The foursome stopped at Multnomah Falls to buy a coloring book and crayons for Missy and two inexpensive waterproof disposable cameras for Kate and Josh. They then decided to climb the short distance up the trail to the bridge facing the falls. There had once been a path which led around the main pool and into a shallow cave behind the tumbling water. But unfortunately, it had been blocked off by the park authorities because of erosion. Missy loved it here, and she begged her daddy to tell the legend of the beautiful Indian maid, the daughter of the chief of the Motamo tribe. It took some coaxing, but Mack finally relented and retold the story as they all stared up into the mist shrouding the falling cascades. The tale centered on a princess, the only child left to her aging father. The chief loved his daughter dearly and carefully picked out a husband for her, a young warrior chief of the Klatstop tribe, whom he knew she loved. The two tribes came together to celebrate the days of the wedding feast, but before it could begin, a terrible sickness began to spread among the men, killing many. The elders and the chiefs met to discuss what they could do about the wasting disease that was quickly disseminating their warriors. The oldest medicine man among them spoke of how his own father, when aged and near death, had foretold of a terrible sickness that would kill their men, an illness that could only be stopped if a pure and innocent daughter of a chief would willingly give up her life for her people. In order to fulfill the prophecy, she must voluntarily climb to a cliff above the big river and from there jump to her death onto the rocks below. A dozen young women, all daughters of the various chiefs, were brought before the council. After considerable debate, the elders decided that they could not ask for such a precious sacrifice, especially for a legend they weren't sure was true. I know that's right. Yeah. But the disease continued to spread unabated among the men, and eventually the young warrior chief, the husband to be, fell ill with the sickness. The princess who loved him knew in her heart that something had to be done, and after cooling his fever and kissing him softly on the forehead, she slipped away. It took her all night and the next day to reach the place spoken of in the legend, a towering cliff overlooking the big river and the lands below. After praying and giving herself to the Great Spirit, she fulfilled the prophecy by jumping without hesitation to her death on the rocks below. Back at the villages the next morning, those who had been sick arose well and strong. There was great joy and celebration until the young warrior discovered that his beloved bride was missing. As the awareness of what had happened spread rapidly among the people, many began the journey to the place where they knew they would find her. As they silently gathered around her broken body at the base of the cliff, her grief stricken father cried out to the Great Spirit, asking that her sacrifice would always be remembered. In that moment, water began to fall from the place where she had jumped, turning into a fine mist that fell at their feet, slowly forming a beautiful pool. Missy usually loved the telling almost as much as Mack did. It had all the elements of a true redemption story, not unlike the story of Jesus that she knew so well. It centered on a father who loved his only child and a sacrifice foretold by a prophet. Because of love, the child willingly gave up her life, to save her betrothed and their tribes from certain death. But on this occasion, Missy didn't say a word when the story was finished. Instead, she immediately turned and headed for the van as if to say, "Okay, I'm done here. Let's get going." They made a quick stop for some brunch and a potty break at Hood River and then got right back on the road, reaching La Grande by early afternoon. Here they left I 84 and took the Wallowa Lake Highway, which could take them to the final 72 miles to the town of Joseph. The lake and campground they were headed for was only a few miles beyond Joseph, and after finding their site, they all pitched in and had everything set up in short order. Perhaps not exactly the way Nan would have preferred, but functional nonetheless. The first meal was a Phillips family tradition, flank steak marinated in Uncle Joe's secret sauce. For dessert, they ate the brownies Nan had made the night before, topped with the vanilla ice cream they had packed away in dry ice. That evening, as he sat between three laughing children watching one of nature's greatest shows, Mac's heart was suddenly penetrated by unexpected joy. A sunset of brilliant colors and patterns played off the few clouds that had waited in the wings to become central actors in this unique presentation. He was a rich man, he thought to himself, in all the ways that mattered. By the time supper was cleaned up, night had fallen. The deer, routine day visitors, and sometimes a serious nuisance, had gone wherever deer go to bed. Their shift was picked up by the night troublemakers, raccoons, squirrels, and chipmunks that traveled in roving bands looking for any container left slightly open. The Phillips campers knew this from past experience. The first night they had ever spent in these campgrounds had cost them 4 dozen Rice Krispie treats, a box of chocolates, and all their peanut butter cookies. Before it got too late, the four went on a short hike away from the campfires and lanterns to a dark and quiet spot where they could lie down and gaze in wonder at the Milky Way, stunning and intense when undiminished by the pollution of city lights. Mack could lie and gaze up into that vastness for hours. He felt so incredibly small yet comfortable with himself. Of all the places he sensed the presence of God, out here, surrounded by nature and under the stars, was one of the most tangible. He could almost hear the song of worship they sang to their Creator. And in his reluctant heart, he joined in as best he could. Then it was back to the campsite, and after several trips to the facilities, Mac tucked the three in, turned into safety and security of their sleeping bags. He prayed briefly with Josh before moving across to where Kate and Missy lay waiting. But when it came to Missy's turn to pray, he wanted to talk, and she wanted to talk instead. Daddy, how come she had to die? It took Mac a moment to figure out who it was that Missy was talking about, suddenly realizing that the Multnama princess must have been on her mind since they had stopped earlier. Honey, she didn't have to die. She chose to die to save her people. They were very sick and she wanted them to be healed. There was a silence, and Mac knew that another question was forming in the darkness. Did it really happen? This time the question was from Kate, obviously interested in the conversation. Did what really happen? Did the Indian princess really die? Is the story true? Mac thought before he spoke. I don't know, Kate. It's a legend, and sometimes legends are stories that teach a lesson. So it didn't really happen? Asked Missy. It might have, sweetie. Sometimes legends are built from real stories, things that really happen. Again, silence. Then, so is Jesus dying a legend? Mac could hear the wheels turning in Kate's mind. No, honey, that's a true story. And do you know what? I think the Indian princess story is probably true too. Mac waited while his girls processed their thoughts. Missy was next to ask, is the Great Spirit another name for God? You know, Jesus' Papa? Mac smiled in the dark. Obviously, Nan's nightly prayers were having an effect. I would suppose so. It's a good name for God because he is a spirit and he is great. Then how come he's so mean? Ah, here's the question that had been brewing. What do you mean, Missy? Well, the Great Spirit makes the princess jump off the cliff and makes Jesus die on a cross. That seems pretty mean to me. Mac was stuck. He wasn't sure how to answer. At 6.5 years old, Missy was asking questions that wise people had wrestled with for centuries. Sweetheart, Jesus didn't think his daddy was mean. He thought his daddy was full of love and loved him very much. His daddy didn't make him die. Jesus chose to die because he and his daddy love you and me and everyone in the world. He saved us from our sickness, just like the princess. Now came the longest silence, and Mac was beginning to wonder if the girls had fallen asleep. Just as he was about to lean over and kiss them goodnight, a little voice with a noticeable quiver broke into the quiet. Daddy? Yes, honey. Will I ever have to jump off a cliff? Mac's heart broke. as he understood what this conversation had really been about. He gathered his little girl into his arms and pulled her close. With his own voice a little huskier than usual, he gently replied, "No, honey, I will never ask you to jump off a cliff. Never, ever, ever." "Then, will God ever ask me to jump off a cliff?" "No, Missy, he would never ask you to do anything like that." She snuggled deeper into his arms. "Okay, hold me close. Good night, Daddy. I love you." And she was out, drifting deep into a sound sleep with only good and sweet dreams. After a few moments, Mack placed her gently back in her sleeping bag. "You okay, Kate?" he whispered as he kissed her goodnight. "Yep," came the whispered reply. "Daddy?" "What, sweetheart?" "She asks good questions, doesn't she?" "She sure does. She's a special little girl. You both are. Except you're not so little anymore. Now get some sleep. We have a big day ahead of us. Sweet dreams, darling." "You too, Daddy. I love you tons." "I love you too, with all my heart. Good night." Mac zipped up the trailer on his way out, blew his nose, and wiped away the tears that still remained on his cheek. He prayed a silent thanks to God and then went to brew some coffee. Chapter 3. The Tipping Point. Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a quote from that name I just stated. And it says, "The soul is healed by being with children." That is so true. The soul is healed by being with children. Wallowa Lake State Park in Oregon and its surrounding area has been well referred to as the Little Switzerland of America. Wild, rugged mountains rise to almost 10,000 feet, and in between them are hidden innumerable valleys full of streams, hiking trails, and high elevation meadows overflowing with sprays of wildflowers. Wallowa Lake is the getaway into the Eagle Cap Wilderness Area and Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, which sports the deepest gorge in North America, carved out over centuries by the Snake River. It reaches a couple miles top to bottom in places and 10 miles at times from rim to rim. 75% of the recreation area is roadless, with more than 900 miles of hiking trails. Once the domain of the prevailing Nez Perce tribe, the remnants of their presence are scattered throughout this wilderness, as well as those of white settlers traveling through on their way to the west. The nearby town of Joseph was named for a powerful tribal chief whose Indian name meant thunder rolling down the mountain. This area is home to an abundance of flora and wildlife, including elk, bear, deer, mountain goat. The presence of rattlers, especially as you get closer to the Snake River, is reason enough to hike cautiously should you decide to venture off trail. Wallowa Lake itself is 5 miles long and 1 mile wide, formed, some say, by glaciers 9 million years ago. It now sits about a mile from the town of Joseph at an elevation of 4,400 feet. The water, though catch your breath cold most of the year, is comfortable enough by the end of summer for a leisurely swim, at least close in to shore. Sakagaway, at almost 10,000 feet, looks down on this blue jewel from her snow-capped and timbered heights. Mac and the kids filled the next 3 days with fun and leisure. Missy, seemingly satisfied with her daddy's answers, never again raised the issue of the princess, even when one of their day hikes took them by some precipitous cliffs. They spent a few hours traveling the lake shore on paddle boats, tried their best to win a prize at miniature golf, and even went horseback trail riding. After a morning trip to the historic Wade Ranch that sits about halfway between Joseph and Enterprise, they spent the afternoon visiting the little shops in town and Joseph itself. Back at the lake, Josh and Kate raced each other around the go-kart track. Josh came away the winner, but Kate was able to regain bragging rights later that afternoon when she landed 3 good-sized lake trout. Missy caught one with hook and worm, but neither Josh nor Mack could claim a single tug on their fancier lures. Sometime during the weekend, 2 other families seemed to magically weave themselves into the Phillips world. As often happens, friendships had been struck up initially amongst the children and then between the adults. Josh had been especially keen on getting to know the the Duckets, whose eldest, Amber, just happened to be a cute young lady about his age. Kate seriously enjoyed tormenting her older brother about the entire matter, and he would reward her taunting by stomping off to the tent trailer, all bluster and gripe. Amber had a sister, Emmy, who was only a year younger than Kate, and the two spent a lot of time together. Vicky and Emile Doucette had traveled from their home in Colorado, where Emile worked as an agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement, and Vicky stayed home to manage the household, which included their surprise son, JJ, now almost a year old. The Doucettes introduced Mack and his children to a Canadian couple they had met earlier, Jesse and Sarah Madison. These two had an easy, unpretentious manner, and Mack took an instant liking to them. Both careered as independent consultants, Jesse in human resources and Sarah in change management. Missy gravitated immediately to Sarah, and both were often together down at the Doucette campsite, helping Vicky with JJ. Monday broke gloriously, and the entire entourage was excited about their plans to take the Wallowa Lake tramway to the top of Mount Howard, 8,150 feet above sea level. When it was constructed in 1970, the tramway had the steepest vertical lift in North America, with a cable length of almost 4 miles. The trip to the summit lakes takes about 15 minutes in a tram car that dangles anywhere from 3 feet to 120 feet off the ground. Instead of packing a lunch, Jesse and Sarah insisted on treating everyone to a meal at the Summit Grill. The plan was to eat as soon as they reached the top and then spend the rest of the day hiking to the 5 viewpoints and overlooks. Armed with cameras, sunglasses, water bottles, and sunscreen, they headed off by mid morning. As intended, they consumed a variable feast of hamburgers, fries, and shakes at the grill. The elevation must have spurred their appetites. Even Missy was able to down an entire burger and most of the trimmings. After lunch, they hiked to each of the nearby lookouts, the longest trail being from the valley overlook to the Snake River country and Seven Devils Lookout, a little more than 3/4 of a mile. From the Wallowa Valley overlook, they could see as far as the towns of Joseph, Enterprise, Losteen, and even Wallowa. From the Royal Purple overlook and the Summit overlook, they enjoyed the crystal clear view, looking into the states of Washington and Idaho. Some even thought they could see across the Idaho panhandle into Montana. By late afternoon, everyone was tired and happy. Missy, whom Jesse had carried on his shoulders to the last couple of lookouts, was now falling asleep in her father's arms as they bumped and whirled down from the summit. The 4 young people, along with Sarah, had their faces plastered against the windows, oohing and eyeing at the wonders to be seen along the descent. Forgive the dog. The Doucettes sat holding hands in quiet conversation while JJ slept in his father's arms. This is one of those rare and precious moments, thought Mack, that catches you by surprise and almost takes your breath away. If only Nan could be here, it truly would be perfect. He shifted Missy's weight to a more comfortable position for her, now that she was totally out, and pulled back the hair from her face to look at her. The grime and sweat of the day had done nothing but strangely enhance her innocence and beauty. Why do they have to grow up? He mused and kissed her on the forehead. At evening, the 3 families combined their food for a last supper together. Taco salad was the entree, with lots of cut fresh vegetables and dip. And somehow, Sarah had been able to whip up a chocolate dessert with layers of whipped cream, mousse, and brownies and other delights that had everyone feeling decadent and satisfied. The remains of supper stashed back in the coolers and the dishes cleaned and put away. The adults sat sipping coffee around a blazing campfire while Emil shared his adventures of breaking up endangered animals, smuggling rings, and explaining how they caught poachers and others who hunted illegally. He was a skilled storyteller, and his vocation offered a deep resource for some hilarious tales. It was all fascinating, and Mac realized again that there was much in the world about which he was naive. As the evening wound down, Emil and Vicky headed for bed first, and then sleepy-eyed baby and their sleepy-eyed baby. Jesse and Sarah volunteered to stay a while before walking the Doucette girls back to their campsite. The three Phillips kids and two Doucettes immediately disappeared into the safety of the tent trailer to share stories and secrets. As often happens when a campfire burns long, the conversation turned from the humorous to the more personal. Sarah seemed eager to ask Mac about the rest of his family, especially Nan. So, what is she like, Mackenzie? Mac loved an opportunity to brag about his Nan. Well, besides being beautiful, and I'm not just saying that, she really is beautiful inside and out. He looked up sheepishly to see them both smiling at him. He was really missing her and was glad the night shadows had hid his embarrassment. Her full name is Nanette. Almost no one calls her anything but Nan. She has quite a reputation in the medical community, at least in the Northwest. She's a nurse and works with oncology patients, cancer patients who are terminal. It's tough work, but she really loves it. Anyway, she's written some papers and has been a speaker at a couple conferences. Really? Sarah prompted. What does she speak on? She helps people think through their relationship with God in the face of their own death. Mac answered. I'd love to hear more about that, encouraged Jesse as he stirred up the fire with a stick, causing it to bloom with renewed vigor. Mac hesitated. As much as he felt unusually at ease with these two, he didn't really know them, and the conversation had gotten a little deeper than he was comfortable with. He searched quickly for a short answer to Jesse's interest. Nan's a lot better at that than I am. I guess she thinks about God differently than most folks. She even calls him Papa because of the closeness of their relationship, if that makes sense. Of course it does, exclaimed Sarah as Jesse nodded. Is that a family thing, referring to God as Papa? No, said Mac, laughing. The kids have picked it up some, but I'm not comfortable with it. It just seems a little too familiar to me. Anyway, Nan has a wonderful father, so I think it's just easier for her. It had slipped out, and Mac inwardly shuddered, hoping no one had noticed. But Jesse was looking right at him. Your dad wasn't too wonderful? He asked gently. Yeah, Mac paused. I guess you could say he was not too wonderful. He died when I was just a kid, of natural causes. Mac laughed, but the sound was empty. He looked at the two. He drank himself to death. We're so sorry, Sarah said for both of them, and Mac could sense that she meant it. Well, he said, forcing another laugh, life is hard sometimes, but I have a lot to be thankful for. An awkward silence followed as Mac wondered what it was about these two that seemed to penetrate his defenses so easily. He was rescued seconds later by a flurry of children as they poured out of the trailer and into their midst. Much to Kate's glee, she and Emmy had caught Josh and Amber holding hands in the dark, and now she wanted the whole world to know. By this time, Josh was so smitten that he was willing to put up with any harassment and took what she dished out in stride. He couldn't have wiped the silly grin off his face even if he tried. Both Madison hugged Mac and his children good night, with Sarah giving him an especially tender squeeze before she left. Then, hand in hand with Amber and Emmy, they headed off into the darkness toward the Doucette site. Mac watched them until he could no longer hear their night whispers and the swaying of their flashlight disappeared from sight. He smiled himself and turned to herd his own brood in the direction of their sleeping bags. Prayers were said all around, followed by goodnight kisses and giggles from Kate in low conversation with her older brother, who would occasionally burst out in a harsh whisper so everyone could hear it. Cut it out, Kate. Ugh. I mean it. You're such a brat. And eventually silence. Mac packed up what he could by the light of the lanterns and soon decided to leave the rest till daylight. They weren't planning to leave until early afternoon anyway. He brewed his final nightly cup of coffee and sat sipping it in front of the fire that had burned itself down to a flickering mass of red hot coals. It was so easy to get lost inside such a bed of glowing, undulated embers. He was alone, yet not alone. Wasn't that a line from the Bruce Cockburn song Rumors of Glory? He wasn't sure, but if he remembered, he would look it up when he got home. As he sat mesmerized by the fire and wrapped in his warmth, he prayed, mostly prayers of thanksgiving. He had been given so much. Blessed was probably the right word. He was content, at rest, and full of peace. Mac did not know it then, but within 24 hours, his prayers would change drastically. The next morning, though sunny and warm, didn't start off so well. Mac rose early to surprise the kids with a wonderful breakfast, but burned two fingers while trying to free flapjacks that had stuck to the griddle. In response to the searing pain, he knocked over the stove and griddle and dropped the bowl of pancake batter onto the sandy ground. The kids, startled awake by the clatter and under the breath expletives, had stuck their heads out of the tent trailer to see what all the commotion was about. They began to giggle as soon as they grasped the situation, but one "Hey, it's not funny" from Mac, and they ducked back into the safety of the tent, still tittering from their hideout while they watched through the mesh windows. So breakfast, instead of the feast Mac had intended, was cold cereal with half and half since the last of the milk had gone into the pancake batter. Mac spent the next hour trying to organize the sight with two fingers stuck to a glass of ice water, which had which had to be refreshed frequently with chips that Josh block broke off the ice block with the backside of a spoon. Word must have gotten out because Sarah Madison showed up with burn first aid, and within minutes of having his fingers slathered in the whitest liquid, she felt the sting recede. He felt the sting recede. About that time, Josh and Kate, having completed their ordered chores, showed up to ask if they could go out to the Doucette's canoe one last time, promising to wear life jackets. After the initial mandatory no and the required amount of begging from the kids, especially Kate, Mac finally gave in, reminding them once again of the rules of canoe safety and conduct. He wasn't too concerned. Their campsite was only a stone's throw from the lake, and they promised to stay close in to shore. Mac would be able to keep an eye on them while he continued packing up the camp. Missy was busy at the table coloring in the book from Motnama Falls. She's just too cute, Mac thought, glancing in her direction as he worked to clean up the mess he had made earlier. She was dressed in the only clean thing she had left, a little red sundress with embroidered wildflowers, a Joseph purchase from their first day's trip into town. About 15 minutes later, Mac looked up when he heard a familiar voice calling, "Daddy," from the direction of the lake. It was Kate, and she and her brother were paddling like pros out on the water. Both were obediently wearing their life jackets, and he waved at them. It was remarkable how a seemingly insignificant action or event can change entire lives. Kate, lifting her paddle to wave back in response, lost her balance and tipped the canoe. There was a frozen look of terror on her face as almost in silence and slow motion it rolled over. Josh frantically leaning to try to balance, but it was too late and he disappeared from sight in the midst of the splash. Mac was already headed for the water's edge, not intending to go in, but to be near where they bobbed up. Kate was up first, sputtering and crying, but there was no sign of Josh. Then suddenly, an eruption of water and legs, and Mac knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. To his amazement, all of the instincts he had honed as a teenage lifeguard came roaring back. In a matter of seconds, he hit the water, shoes and shirt off. He didn't even notice the icy shock as he began racing the 50 feet out toward the overturned canoe, ignoring for a moment the terrified sobbing of his daughter. She was safe. His primary focus was Josh. Taking a deep breath, he dove under. The water, in spite of all the churning, was still fairly clear, with visibility about 3 feet. He found Josh quickly and also discovered why he was in trouble. One of the straps on his life vest had gotten tangled in the canoe webbing. Try as he might, he couldn't yank it free either. So he tried to signal Josh to push himself deeper into the canoe, where breathable air was trapped. But the poor boy was panicking, straining against the strap that was keeping him caught under the canoe rim and underwater. Mack surfaced, yelling at Kate to swim to shore, gulped what air he could, and went under a second time. By this third dive, and knowing time was running out, Mack realized that he could either he could either keep trying to free Josh from the vest or flip the canoe. Since Josh, in his panic, was not letting anyone near him, Mack chose the latter. Whether it was God and angels or God and adrenaline, he could never know for sure. But on only his second attempt, he succeeded in rolling the canoe over, freeing Josh from his tether. The jacket, finally able to do what it was designed to do, now kept the boy's face up above water. Max surfaced behind Josh, who now was limp and unconscious, blood oozing from a gash on his head where the canoe had banged him as Mack had righted it. He immediately began mouth to mouth on his son as best as he could, while others who had heard the commotion arrived to pull him and the canoe with the attached vest toward the shallows. Oblivious to the shouts around him as people barked instructions and questions, Mac focused on his task, his own panic building inside his chest. Just as his feet touched solid ground, Josh began to cough and throw up water and breakfast. A huge cheer erupted from the everyone gathered, but Mac couldn't care less. Overwhelmed with relief and the adrenaline rush of a narrow escape, he began to cry, and then suddenly Kate was sobbing with her arms around his neck, and everyone was laughing and crying and hugging. Somehow, they all made it to shore. Among those who had been drawn to the scene by the panic and noise were Jesse Madison and Emile Doucette. Through the mayhem of cheers and relief, Mac could hear Emile's voice, like the repetitious chant of a rosary, whispering again and again, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." It was his canoe. It could have been his children. Mac found him, wrapped his arm around the younger man, and emphasized strongly in his ear, "Stop it. This wasn't your fault, and everyone's okay." Emile began to sob, emotion suddenly freed from behind a dam of pent up guilt and fear. A potential crisis had been averted, or so Mac thought. Okay. Ooh, hoo, 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 hoo. My goodness. That was wild. As you see, you heard the last line, or so Mac thought. My goodness. Chapter 4 is entitled The Great Sadness. The Great Sadness. Now, he referred to this in chapters 1 and chapter 2, talking about this great sadness was over him, had overcome him, and things like that. The great sadness. Oh, my goodness. So, the great sadness is to come in the next chapter. So, Sunday, when we come back together, we're going to be reading chapter 4 and chapter 5. Okay. Chapter 4, again, is the great sadness. And then I'm getting to chapter 5 here. Chapter 5 is entitled, I'm getting to it. Chapter 4 is a long chapter. My goodness. Oh, my goodness. Chapter 5 is entitled, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Chapter 4, The Great Sadness. Chapter 5, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Oh, man, you all. Oh, my goodness. This is so good. Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. This is why I say, you all, the books are always, 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 always better than the movie. Oh, man. Okay. And then I said that after I finished reading the book with you all, I'm going to go back and rewatch the movie. I have to. I have to. Okay. All right. Oh, my goodness, you all. I am really excited about knowing more. My adrenaline is pumping now, too. My goodness. Okay. And to know you all, to know that this is Max recounting of his own true stories. This is a true story, y'all. This is a true story. I'm still trying. This is not a fictional story. That's the mind blow. Oh my goodness, you all. This is going to be so good. Okay. Alrighty, you all. So look, we'll be back here on Sunday with chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4, The Great Sadness. Chapter 5, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Okay. Be back here 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right here, Divine Femininity United. I am your girl, Dr. Bianca Miss B. Lee. I love you. I mean it. There's absolutely positively nothing you can do about it. Don't you even try it. Again, we'll see you back here on Friday. I mean, on Sunday. Friday? Where I get Friday from? On Sunday, right here, Divine Femininity United. Peace, you all.